most language learning apps in 2026 are obsessed with AI. AI tutors, AI chatbots, AI roleplay, AI companions at this point, honestly. And personally, I think a lot of language learning apps are becoming worse because instead of helping people interact more with real language, they're creating these very closed ecosystems where learners sometimes spend more time maintaining streaks and interacting with bots than actually experiencing real language. And that's why today I want to talk about a flashcard app that genuinely surprised me this year. It's called VoCat. And for the first time in a while, I used a language app and thought, okay, this actually understands what learning is supposed to feel like. For those who don't know me, my name is Lauren. I'm a French teacher with a degree in applied linguistics. I live in South Korea and I spend a huge part of my life thinking about language learning, pedagogy, and how technologies should support learning without replacing human interaction. And before we start, I want to clarify something important. When I talk about flashcard apps, I'm only interested in apps that let you create your own vocabulary list because honestly, I don't really believe in pre-made vocabulary decks. Most apps organize them by themes or categories, which gives this illusion of structure and efficiency, but pedagogically, I actually think it often makes learning harder. Because when you learn vocabulary, the more abstract and disconnected words are from your real needs, your real life, or real communication, the lower the return on investment becomes. You spend energy memorizing words you may not even use. And if your goal is to become efficient, save time, and build personalized competence, then vocabulary needs to come from your own exposure and your own experiences. There's also another issue. When you study several similar words together, especially as a beginner, the risk of confusion becomes much higher. Your brain starts mixing things up because the contrast between the words is too weak. Honestly, I would probably say that one of the worst ways to organize vocabulary is alphabetically, because after a while, all the words start looking or sounding similar. Your brain starts processing patterns based on visual similarity instead of meaning, and honestly, that can become really difficult for memory and recall, especially when you don't fully master the words yet. The risk of confusion becomes much higher. Ironically, one of the best ways to organize vocabulary is sometimes to not organize it too much at all. Real language exposure is messy, and that contrast between completely different words actually helps memory. Thematic vocabulary lists can feel reassuring because everything is neatly organized, but realistically, if you suddenly need a word during a real conversation, are you going to open your kitchen vocabulary deck and make the other person wait while you scroll through categories? Or are you just going to quickly search it in a translator or in ChatGPT? And realistically, in real life, that's usually not how people function. Vocabulary learning is organic. If today you need the word fork during conversation, that doesn't necessarily mean you need to immediately know 85 cooking related words right after. What matters is repeated, meaningful exposure over time, not artificially forcing huge thematic lists into your brain all at once. And to be honest, I also don't think people need to build these gigantic, perfectly organized personal vocabulary encyclopedias, because first of all, words naturally come back, and really that's the beauty of the language. It's everywhere around us. Words are reusable. They're not single-use objects. You will hear them again, so don't panic. If a word actually matters in your life, your environment will expose you to it again sooner or later. And second, if you urgently need a word during a conversation, it's usually much faster to quickly search it with a translator or ChatGPT. And please choose a good translator. If you don't know what I mean, go watch my last video about translation, because some apps can genuinely create bad habits for learners without people realizing it. But overall, the real goal is not to store vocabulary inside a beautiful notebook or perfectly organized database. The goal is to store it inside your brain. You're not trying to build perfect archives. We're trying to become multilingual. Vocabulary learning happens in spirals. Maybe today you learn fork, knife, spoon, and then 2 weeks later, during a completely different situation, you suddenly need microwave, fridge, and pen. And that's normal. That's how real language develops. Not through giant static categories, but through repeated contact with vocabulary across real situations and real moments of life. So for me, flashcards are incredibly powerful when they stay connected to real language and real personal exposure. Anyway, that was a bit of a tangent, but I really wanted to make my perspective clear before talking about the app itself, because I think understanding why I chose this app is just as important as the review itself. Flashcards are amazing for repetition and long-term memory. Your brain needs repeated exposure to vocabulary in order to retain it. This part is true, but the problem is that a lot of apps slowly turn vocabulary learning into this giant gamified universe where people feel productive without actually getting closer to real language. And personally, I think that it can sometimes become counterproductive because language does not live inside apps. Language lives between people. Apps should support exposure, not replace it. And this is exactly why I ended up liking VoCat so much, because unlike a lot of modern apps, it doesn't try to become your entire life. It just tries to do one thing properly, help you review vocabulary efficiently. And honestly, that kind of simplicity has become surprisingly rare. The first thing that stood out to me was the design. It's clean, simple, coherent, no visual chaos, nothing feels overwhelming, everything feels intentional. When you open the app, you immediately understand the structure. You have your flashcards, your library, your learning section, and your quizzes. That alone already makes the experience feel lighter mentally. A lot of educational apps feel exhausting before you even start learning. This one doesn't. Now, my favorite feature in the entire app is something called Blinker. And for me, this is exactly the kind of thing I like to see in the educational technology. Basically, it continuously loops your flashcards with both audio and visual input. So if you're walking, cleaning, commuting, driving, cooking, or just exhausted at the end of the day, you can still passively expose yourself to vocabulary. And that matters a lot because one of the biggest problems adults have with language learning is not motivation, it's energy. People are tired, people work, people have lives. So apps that only function during perfect study sessions don't adapt well to reality. But VoCat does, and that immediately made it feel more intelligent to me pedagogically. Then you have the quiz system. You get 3 modes: classic flashcards, multiple choice, and dictation. And the dictation mode is honestly one of the strongest parts, because the moment you have to type a word yourself, your brain engages completely differently. Recognition is easy, recall is harder, and recall is where learning actually starts becoming solid. The app also lets you customize basically everything before a session: how many cards you want, which list you combine, how things are sorted, what appears on screen, what stays hidden. And I love that. Because good learning tools give control back to the learner. They don't force everyone into the same rigid system. Now, I will say this though, because the app gives you so many customization options, some people might initially feel a bit lost, especially because a lot of users naturally tend to review vocabulary directly from their original list, since that's the first thing they see. And technically you can study that way, but I do think some learners might accidentally miss the dedicated review modes and quiz systems located in separate sections of the app. That being said, I don't really see this as bad design. Honestly, I think it's mostly the consequence of the app being extremely flexible. When you give users a lot of control, there's naturally a small learning curve at first. And personally, I still prefer that over apps that oversimplify everything to the point where you can't customize anything anymore. Now, this is probably the area where VoCat impressed me the most: the language handling. When you create a flashcard, you define the language and of each side separately, which sounds simple, but surprisingly, a lot of apps still don't handle this very well. So the pronunciation system actually works properly. The app knows this side is French, this side is English, and it handles the audio accordingly, which is incredibly important for language learning because inaccurate pronunciation input can become a real issue pedagogically. And if needed, you can even manually adjust the pronunciation yourself. That's genuinely great design, especially for learners dealing with languages that have difficult pronunciation system, for example. Another thing I really appreciated is that the app respects the fact that people already have systems. You can import with CSV, Google Sheets, back up your data, and sync through Google Drive, which means your vocabulary is not trapped inside some weird closed ecosystem, and honestly, I really appreciate that. I also appreciate the fact that the app doesn't try to force you into one closed system. A lot of learners already have their own habits and tools, spreadsheets, Notion, documents, personal databases, and I think good educational software should adapt to that reality instead of trying to replace it completely. And personally, I think that's a much healthier approach. Good software adapts to the human behavior, not the opposite. Now, if I had one feature request for the future, it would probably be the import system. Right now, imports work through CSV files or Google Sheets, which already work very well, to be fair, but I think it would be amazing if the app eventually supported direct copy-paste imports from tools like ChatGPT, for example. Imagine generating vocabulary inside GPT already formatted correctly with commas or separators, then simply pasting everything directly into the app without needing to create a separate file first. That would make the workflow even faster, even for people who already use AI as a part of their study or teaching process. And honestly, I think that would fit perfectly in with the philosophy of the app. Now, let's talk about the pricing, because honestly, huge respect here too. The app is basically free, and not fake free, actually usable free. There is a premium system, but instead of aggressively forcing subscriptions everywhere, they let you unlock premium features temporarily by watching ads, which genuinely feels fair. No aggressive pressure, no overwhelming monetization system, no constant feeling that the app is trying to sell you something every 5 minutes. Just, hey, support the app if you want extra stuff. Cool. I love that. So overall, what impressed me the most about VoCat is not one individual feature, is the coherence. Everything feels designed around one central idea: help people learn vocabulary efficiently without overwhelming them. And that's becoming surprisingly rare in educational technology. A lot of apps today feel like they're trying to become entertainment platforms. VoCat still feels like a learning tool, and I mean that as a compliment. Now, of course, flashcards alone will never make you fluent. You still need real exposure, real conversations, real content, real emotional connection to the language, because language learning is deeply human. But when flashcards are used correctly as support tools for repetition and recall, they can massively accelerate your progress. And for me, this is honestly one of the best examples of that philosophy I've seen this year. So yeah, if you've been looking for a flashcard app that feels clean, efficient, flexible, and actually well thought out from a language learning perspective, I genuinely think VoCat is worth checking out. And genuinely, huge respect to the developer, because making something this coherent alone is not easy at all. Anyway, that's it for today. My name is Lauren. I'm a linguist and a French teacher. If you want to study with me, links in bio.